Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Finns post game. My name is Eric Wiedeke. I am your host for today, and I am joined by the incomparable Coach Eric Smith. You can follow him at OL Coach Smith 63. Before we do get started here, I do just want to remind you guys that this show is brought to you guys by Thompson Cigar. Maybe you feel like having a victory cigar after this ball game here, but make sure you use promo code 3yards20 for 20% off on orders of $75 or more. That's promo code 3yards20. So we're going to get right into it here, Coach. Dolphins win 20-17. Another week, I think we can both say, where the first half play is definitely a good bit stronger than the second half play. But the Dolphins pull this one out. Just your overall takeaways from this ball game here versus the Bucs.
So I think the biggest takeaway that I had as I was watching the game is that, we sat here last week and talked about this team falling apart under Mike McDaniel, quitting on him, right? And kind of felt like it was the beginning of the end, right? And it was going to be tough for the team to get up for the remaining games of the season. Two more games that didn't mean anything. But today you saw a team that played hard from start to finish. There was definitely a lot of good stuff from younger players that we saw, but my biggest takeaway, like I said, was just that this team did not quit, right? And as we move closer to the offseason, like that's what everything that happens over, today, next week is stuff that leads into the offseason. And that was going to be one of the biggest things when it came to whether or not Mike McDaniel stuck around or not, because obviously there was a lot of people in media saying that Stephen Ross really likes Mike McDaniel. They want to keep Mike McDaniel. But if the team just, if the players in that locker room flat out said, we're not playing for this coach, it's not important to us anymore, then there's no way that you could have even considered keeping him going into the offseason. So I think this kind of reignites that option, right? Doesn't mean that he is definitely safe, but it definitely helps to make a case that this team, with nothing to play for, is still playing hard for this coach.
Yeah, I think it definitely shows that Mike McDaniel still does have at least the support of the players in the locker room, playing a team that, for better for worse, and I understand Tampa Bay has been reeling over the last few weeks, but this is still a team with plenty to play for in the Buccaneers. Yep. Still an offense that, on paper at least, is as explosive as any in the NFL. The thing that I come away from this game with is I think the Dolphins got, I don't know if conservative is the right word in the second half, but you can definitely kind of feel that they took their foot off the gas pedal just a little bit. But on the same token, it was nice to see that their defense allowed them to do so and not get penalized for it. The pass rush in this game was a lot better. Bradley Chubb coming up with the big strip sack at the end. He had a couple sacks today. Zach Sealer was making his presence felt. I liked a lot of what I saw from guys like Kenneth Grant up front in this ball game. I feel like he was kind of getting held all day with not getting a few calls. But overall, I mean, this was a solid overall team victory. I think the other thing that you can come away encouraged with is that, again, it wasn't a second straight week where it wasn't as good in the second half as it was in the first, but I think you can see a progression with Quinn getting more comfortable within the offense, being able to, learn when a play is kind of dead and throw the football away, which was one of the bigger things that I saw between this week and last week. He was a little bit more reckless with the football last week. Just touching on that aspect of it, because obviously he's going to be one of the big topics of conversation down the stretch here. Is there anything that can be done next week in New England that makes you say that he's got the inside track? Is because I think we all understand 2026 is going to be somewhat of a transitionary year at the quarterback position. Is there anything that can be done in New England for you to say he's got the inside track as at least the 1 year bridge guy next year?
Um, Not as somebody that I'm going to hand the job to, right? I agree with what you said about him, I guess looking a little more comfortable, a little less frantic. There were some early early passes, particularly a couple of balls he threw up to Malik Washington that I was questioning what he was thinking there. But there was a lot of good stuff throughout the game. You mentioned the idea of knowing when to throw the ball away. There was a play where they were deep in the Buccaneers red zone and they got lined up with like 4 seconds left, and you could hear on the television broadcast Quinn saying something like let's go," right? And they're getting set at 4 seconds and able to snap the ball. It ends up being, I think it was a play action boot to the right side. And that's one of those ones that he threw away. But it felt like anytime in the past something like that happened, it was waste of timeout, right? And just not even try. And I think that I don't remember who, somebody had tweeted that there was actually a option for a touchdown on that, right? And Quinn, might have missed that read, but didn't take that play and just take a delay of game, didn't take a timeout, didn't try to force it in there, right? We get up there, we're hurried, and it doesn't just completely implode. You're still able to snap the ball and play for the next down. We saw Quinn be able to scramble, right, and convert a first down, made somebody miss, dove forward. It was nice to see a quarterback that's able to do that. And just some of the other passes, like there was an early one to Dulcich where there was, I don't know if it was a free rusher, but somebody got in pretty quickly and didn't get a big hit on Ewers, right? But he's coming straight at him. Ewers is kind of drifting back and just kind of flicks it out there and gives Dulcich an opportunity to make a play, and he does, right? And that was the kind of stuff that felt like it was missing before, right? And again, not everything was perfect. There was what I thought was a drop by Waddle later in the game when you go back and watch it, and the ball's like on his back shoulders. He's running towards the sideline. The conversion to Julian Hill was down on his back hip, right? So players are making plays for Quinn Ewers, right? He's not just playing out of his mind, but
Right.
he's doing enough to make it a competent offense. And that's, really what you hope to get out of him as a seventh round rookie. So I would say that heading into next week and into the offseason, what you hope to see against New England, who's going to be a better team than the first two teams that Quinn has faced, right? That you just see that continued progression where it doesn't seem like it's too big of, the moment's not too big for him. And again, I'm not going to go, no matter what he does, he could go out next week and throw for 400 yards. And I don't know that I could get to the point where I'm saying, yeah, this is Quinn's team next year. I still think you got to go, and depending on what you don't do with Tua, of course, right? I still would love to see them go out and make a run at somebody like a Malik Willis, right? Kind of a high upside type guy to come in and compete. Maybe a mid-round pick as far as a quarterback to, again, come in, compete, see what you have, and bridge yourself to 27 where you'll have the resources to, maybe go get whatever quarterback you want. But I like what Quinn did this week, but I'm not going to, go overboard with it.
Definitely. I mean, as you mentioned, I think that there were some early decisions by Quinn that were not the best. The throws downfield to Malik Washington kind of being among those. I do find it interesting, and I'm sure this is more of a Mike McDaniel thing than it is, a straight up Tua thing.
I think I know
But
where you're going.
I do find the involvement of the tight ends being a lot heavier with Quinn pretty interesting. And I do want to kind of just touch on this theme of guys that are kind of at the end of the roster and performing down the stretch here. Dulcich had a pretty strong performance. I think even Andrew Meyer, coming in relief of Aaron Brewer, kind of showing some of that promise that he showcased in the preseason. A guy like Jason Marshall, who may have had his best game as a pro today, these are the kinds of small wins at the end of the roster that add up to something that you can really take with you into 2026. Because I'm looking at, a position like tight end, and I'm not saying that you don't add to the room, but if you are able to bring back a Darren Waller, I can kind of talk myself into a Dulcich Hill Waller tight end room for another year. Maybe Jalen Conyers if he comes back healthy, because I know a lot of people really liked him out of the draft. Um, this is kind of, I don't want to, throw up the banner here and say mission accomplished finding depth in, late in the season, but it just has to be encouraging when you see some of the young players at the end of the roster show out and kind of prove that they can be part of the roster going forward in 2026.
Yeah, and again, these last handful of games should be very much an evaluation phase, and felt good from that perspective, especially when you're going into an off season where you have limited financial resources. You're going to have quite a few draft picks, but it's a lottery ticket with the draft picks. You got some work to do to get money that you can actually spend. So an important part of heading into this offseason with those limited resources is going to be, don't create holes where they don't exist, right? So like you said, maybe that's not a top 5 tight end room with Hill, Dulcich, Waller, and throwing Conyers in there as well, right? But that's not something that you need to immediately upgrade, right? So don't go out there just letting these guys walk away and creating a hole when you have guys that have, again, we don't know who the GM is. We don't know who the head coach is, right? But speaking as if we're running it back with Mike McDaniel, right? Let's not create holes when we have players that have played well in the system. And the young guys, you hit on pretty much everybody. I kind of made a list for myself, right? Jalen Wright getting some nice carries in this game. Greg Dulcich was very much featured, and I think that was very intentional, right? I think that I don't know what their plan is for Waller next year. I don't know if Waller wants to come back and play another year, right? But no matter at this point now, no matter what Waller does, you kind of know that you have a viable option is that F tight end, right? If somebody falls in your lap, right? Like I know that Kenyon Sadiq's a big time name right now, right? If he falls to you and you can make a case for it, you don't run away from a player like that, but you also don't have to reach for the second or third F tight end in the draft just because you need to fill that position, right? Theo Weiss had some good stuff today, showed some good chemistry. I do think that the touchdown that he had was more a case of a busted coverage. I think that the Buccaneers giving more attention to Waller and leaving Weiss open, but he was given the opportunity. He made the play. Andrew Meyer, right? And I really like to see Andrew Meyer to guard. I almost feel like he's probably a better guard in this system than he is a center. But going back to the preseason, uh, I believe Aaron Brewer had missed the beginning of the preseason, and Meyer had to fill in with the first team as center then, right? And then he comes back from his injury, and Brewer's kind of dinged up, right? So even if they wanted to move Meyer to guard, couldn't do it still. I thought he had a solid day. There were a couple of times where the I don't want to say the lack of athleticism from Meyer, right? But because when you're comparing him to Aaron Brewer, that's not fair, right? But
Right.
he was average to above average in terms of athleticism for NFL centers. Um, but I thought that he had a solid day. I would like to find a way to get at least give him the opportunity to compete for a spot on that starting 5 next year, right? Cole Strange, I still feel is the weakest link on that offensive line. So as you go into next year, even if you bring Cole Strange back, I would like to see Meyer getting an opportunity to play there. I think you mentioned Kenneth Grant. He had a couple of really nice plays and, plenty of others that could have been called. It was kind of frustrating that we saw Andrew Meyer get called on that holding
Oh
on
my
Vita
God.
Vea early, right? And then you watch Zach Sealer and Kenneth Grant getting bear hugged and don't see a flag, and it's like, I guess they don't have enough all pros to get that flag
Right.
thrown, right? And then you got Zeke Biggers coming through with the field goal block, and I had said going back to the preseason, I thought that he would be on the active roster because uh, that's kind of a in some ways being able to block a kick is a fluke, right? But when you look at somebody like Z Bigger, so I think he had 5 or 6 of them through his college career. Like at some point, it's not a fluke, and it's just something that you have a knack for, right? And we saw him be able to get out there and get that today. Going forward, right? A, a field goal block at a key juncture of a meaningful game can completely change the complexion of the game, right? That's a game-changing thing to have on the field. And then, you did mention Jason Marshall, and he had a very good game, right? Had a couple of pass breakups. I think he had a tackle for loss right before his interception. And even on that interception, like he wasn't in a great position, right? And he didn't even time the jump well, but just his athletic ability and his length put him in a position that he was still able to come down with that play, right? And when you're sitting here in, with one game to go in the season and Jason Marshall's getting that opportunity now, then hopefully again you get to a meaningful game in that same situation and he's timing that jump better, right? And still coming down with the interception. So I thought that today, more than coming out with a win, even more than Quinn Ewers, I thought what all those other guys did, I thought was a bigger thing for the Dolphins, and I hope that we get to see that next week as well. We'll probably touch on the injuries at some point, but some of these guys I expect to be shut down in week 18, and hopefully that again provides opportunities for some of these younger guys to be able to step up and get an opportunity to showcase what they have as well.
And we will definitely be touching on some of the injuries that we saw suffered in this game, as well as some of the other ones that we had known about coming into this game. Right after this, firstly, we are going to talk about our sponsor a little bit. Rula. Taking care of your mental health should not be harder than taking care of your physical health. But when it comes to finding the right therapists, suddenly it's frustrating. You've got long wait lists, you're staring down huge out-of-pocket costs, and that's what usually stops people from getting help. That's where Rula comes in. Rula makes therapy simple, affordable, and fast. They work with most major insurance plans, and the average session copay is just $15, $15. Rula connects you to over 15,000 licensed therapists and psychiatrists nationwide. They cut out the guesswork by matching you with someone based on your needs, preferences, and state requirements, so you're not wasting time with the wrong fit. Rula isn't just a directory. They help you book appointments, stay on top of your schedule, and keep track of progress so you actually get somewhere with therapy. Every therapist on Rula's platform is licensed, vetted, and chosen for their expertise. You're talking to professionals who know how to get results. Thousands of guys have already used Rula to finally get the help they needed. Don't keep putting it off. Go to Rula.com/3yards and get started today. That's RULA.com/3yards. Take the first step, get connected, and take control of your mental health. All right, and we are back. As promised, we are going to touch on some of the injuries a little bit here. I do want to start with the guy that kind of got hurt in today's ball game, and he's one of the young players that, in general, I would say had a pretty disappointing second year, and that's Chop Robinson. Now, I will say, kind of in defense of Chop, and I kind of want to get your feelings on this here, is I feel like after the Jalen Phillips trade, to your point earlier, I feel like he's kind of been playing not necessarily out of position, but I don't think he's being used necessarily to the best of his abilities, or at least he hasn't been. You mentioned how he and Bradley Chubb were kind of lined up in the same spot every time. I noticed this week it did start off flipped.
I saw that too.
The other thing that I noticed with Chop, and I'd been watching this, but the light bulb didn't flick until you had mentioned what you did. And I don't know if this is an Anthony Weaver thing or if this is a Chop Robinson thing, but it feels like last year he found something when he started lining up like super wide along the ends where he can just kind of beat his guy to the outside. I saw him maybe trying a little bit more of that this week. but I hadn't seen it as much this season. Just in your, I mean, obviously as a coach, is that more of an Anthony Weaver thing, or is that a personal preference thing for Chop in terms of how wide along the line he would be lining up?
So a little bit of all of it, and some of it is situational as well, right? When you line yourself up out very wide, you make
Yeah,
yourself a lot more susceptible to a runoff tackle. Um, but there is coaching sides of it as well, right? It feels like a big thing this year is that they haven't had the guys that can win one on one, right? It seems like every time they're getting a pressure or a sack, it's some sort of stunt. And when you're having to use those, you can't line up nearly as wide, right? So if you have guys inside that are winning their one on one matchups and they're pressing the pocket, then you can line up a little wider and give yourself more room to work with on the edge. But if you're constantly having to run these stunts, then it almost becomes too predictable. Like when you're looking at Dan Brunskill's on the field, you're expecting a run, right? It almost becomes the same idea there, right? If Chop Robinson suddenly is lined up wide most of the time in pass situations, and
right.
suddenly he's squeezed, right? You're kind of telegraphing it from that sense. I my biggest gripe with Chop Robinson this year. He's got to play better. He has battled some injuries this year. I think there was a lower body injury early in the season, and then concussion earlier. I think today was also listed as a concussion, but it doesn't feel like Anthony Weaver has moved him around. Like in not even just left or right, but line up on a center, stand him up. Like and we did
I don't,
like
I don't, I don't
he
like him
started
with
to
his
do
hand
that
in
with
the dirt.
Jalen Phillips. Like Anthony Weaver started to do that with Jalen Phillips. And I thought that when Jalen Phillips was traded, that we'd see him finally unlock that option with Chop Robinson. That was that part of the Jalen Phillips move was to allow Chop Robinson to become that, the joker that you move around the defense. And that just hasn't happened. And maybe that has to do with the lack of other options in the edge room, right? When you had Chop Robinson and Bradley Chubb on the outside, then you can move Jalen Phillips around a little bit more. And when you take Jalen Phillips out, Matt Judon wasn't providing anything from a pass rush perspective. So you were limited in that aspect. I would have liked to see more of it. I would have liked to see them try to, you know, put Zach Sealer out there as an end sometimes with Kenneth Grant, Jordan Phillips, or if you want to throw Zeke Biggers in there, right? And then move Chop around and let him, kind of pick his spots there. So I feel like when you drafted Chop Robinson, I think that you should have known that this is not your prototype 4-3 defensive end. This is not your Jared Verse type player. And yet that feels like that's the way that they've been using him. And maybe that is out of necessity, right? But I feel like that has really limited um, Chop's effectiveness. But there's a lot that goes on Chop individually as well. Like I am so tired of watching him just run around behind the quarterback and just run himself out of the play. We saw Bradley Chubb with his sack. They do a good job of starting that outside rush. And then when you're getting to the top of the pocket, you got to be able to counter back inside and get back into the play, where Chop just tends to run around the outside and make it easy for the offensive lineman. So I think it's a combination of, Chop not having that individual growth of being able to add in those counter moves that he needs to develop, but also Anthony Weaver and the rest of the coaching staff using him in a way that, if we sat here on draft night and you told me that we're going to line him up as a 4-3 defensive end 85% of the time, then I was going to tell you that's a bad pick, right? That's a bad way to use them. So I do think it's a combination of both there.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, he just, and I hesitate to even suggest that he bulk up and get stronger, because then you'd be
Right.
taking away from what his best skill set really is. But as it stands right now, I don't like him with his hand in the dirt. I don't think he has the strength to take tackles on one in that way. Um, just talking about the defense in general here, I find it kind of jarring the difference in the secondary play that we got, last week and this week. And I understand, Chase and Higgins are kind of in a class of their own, but you look at these weapons for Tampa, and it really isn't that far off. I you know, I'm just kind of bewildered by the week to week inconsistency that we've kind of seen out of the defense, and I don't know, what that can be attributed to. If it's just there's going to be variance every week. I think the Dolphins actually being able to generate a little bit of pass rush this week definitely helped, but again, with the secondary, is just such a mixed bag. Um, you know, I'm even now I can't really explain it. Just in your opinion here for the secondary, what was the difference between last week and what we saw in this week? Is it just as simple as last week was Minka's first game out, and this week there's an adjustment to not having him there?
It's funny you say that because, to be honest, I haven't thought about the fact all day that Minka Fitzpatrick did not play in this game. Um, and I came into the game fully expecting this to be a disaster from the secondary, like you said, right? Higgins and Chase are in a class of their own, but Evans, Egbuka, Godwin, right? Throw Kate Otten in there, like
Yep.
that lined up to be a pretty poor matchup for the Dolphins. Um, I think I think a lot of it has to do with momentum. Like I think a lot of it is as simple as that, both on the defensive side and the overall game flow of things. Right, when you don't fall behind early, or you don't have that turd quarter where you just completely fall apart, then it's easy to keep playing the whole way through. But it felt like the Dolphins did a good job today of not making anything easy, right? They were constantly challenging passes, and even though they were giving up some of those catches, like I was kind of getting tired of Ashton Davis just trying not to hit a player, but just coming in trying to punch out every single thing. But they were there competing for the ball, right? And going back to that Jason Marshall interception, right? If he would he was trailing in that, right? If Baker
Yep.
Mayfield gets that ball out there, he catches in stride, he scores, right? We may be talking about a completely different conversation, but Jason Marshall comes down with his first career interception in the NFL, right? And now his confidence is sky high for the rest of the day, right? So every pass that's thrown his direction, now you expect them to compete for that. Like going into the game, if I was um, if I was whoever the Buccaneers offensive coordinator was in this game, every single time that I had Mike Evans matched up against Jack Jones, I'd have turned that into a 50-50 ball every time. And there was a couple times that I saw it and I'm like, here we go. And they just didn't do that. Right. And, same idea with, a guy like Buka that I think is a little quicker. Every time that I could have gotten him matched up with Jason Marshall and I read man coverage, I'd have basically tried to clear everything out and done the Wes Welker thing on the inside, right?
Yep.
And just give him that choice route and make him make plays. But like you said, I think the pressure was impactful, right? And we did not see the good version of Baker Mayfield today. Baker did some crazy things in terms of being able to scramble out of the pocket and be able to extend plays with that pressure, but he did not do a great job of being able to finish those plays. There was some that he, either overthrew the receiver or skipped it short, just stuff like that. That when you get the good Baker, if he makes those plays, then it's a game changer. So, I think at this point with the group that we have, I think that it was the momentum of the defense and the plays that they were able to come down with, and the momentum of the game in general. Right? Quinn Ewers did not throw an interception today, right?
Nope.
Yeah. So you're not turning the ball over offensively. You're not, having the quick 3 and out. that kind of stuff that puts the defense right back on the field. So I think the game flow momentum really played into the Dolphins defense this week. So, if you can do that again next week, then I think that you have another chance, right? But if the game flow goes all out of whack early, then you probably fall apart like you did in the second half against the Bengals. And again, right, looking towards the future, the idea here is that you build up that talent to where you're not as dependent on the momentum. That when something bad happens, you still have the talent, right? Or you have a playmaker that can come back and get one of your own, right? That type of thing. But with the way that this roster is constructed now and the young talent they have now, I think that week to week and with 1 week to go next week is going to very much depend on how that early game momentum goes.
Yeah, and I want to close on this. And obviously in the NFL, you don't apologize for any wins that you have. But I just want to, because it felt like to me in the second half, and the defense did step up and make a bunch of plays. But it felt like to me, particularly on offense in the second half, this kind of turned into a white knuckle affair. Even as the Dolphins were up by 10 points pretty consistently, you were kind of just waiting on that one big play for Tampa to kind of break through. And I just to be very clear-eyed about what we saw today, because it's always good to have a win, and it's always good to get over that hump of holding on and actually coming through with the victory, coming off of just a collapse like we saw last week against Cincinnati. But I did find myself kind of thinking that if the Buccaneers weren't so sloppy, this would have gone the other way. And again, you don't apologize for it. The Dolphins certainly didn't hand them any opportunities to win the game, which you can credit them for. But on the same token, it still wasn't the crisp execution that you want in the second half in trying to close out a ball game.
Yeah, completely. And that again goes back to the idea that we are playing with razor thin margins here, right? You saw an opportunity, and I would not have been disappointed had the Dolphins lost this game, about halfway, maybe a little more than halfway. I had tweeted and said, I would not be disappointed at all if this game went to overtime and the Dolphins lost it, right? Then everybody wins, right? But you're playing with razor thin margins here. The Dolphins, not that you can't, you have to be perfect, right? But you cannot make that key mistake, right? Because if there was any key mistake that the Dolphins made throughout this game, I don't feel like they had the ability to overcome that, right? If Quinn Ewers had thrown an interception that put the Buccaneers down, in the inside the 30-yard line or something crazy like that, I don't feel like the Dolphins could have overcome that, right? Had the Buccaneers gotten a 70-yard touchdown pass earlier in the game to make it a 3-point game, I'm not sure that they have the ability to overcome that. So I think that the recipe that you saw today is a recipe that you can win with. And if you have a team that is good enough to execute it consistently, then it's not a bad one, right? Like there wasn't many times in that second half, in at least I didn't feel like that they were having 3 and outs on offense, right? They were getting 1 or 2 first downs and then punting the ball away. So you weren't
Yep.
turning around and putting the defense right back on the field. You were not, the defense never had a turnover where they're like, oh crap, got to get back on the field, right? You didn't have a fake punt converted on you. You didn't have, a punt return touchdown. And you didn't have any of that crazy stuff that we see in these other games.
And I almost wish we did. I almost wish we did. But not because like, oh, I wanted to see them lose whatever draft position, all this, but it just felt like we didn't get an opportunity to see them respond to that thing. And that's what I would have wanted to see more than anything, is if the Buccaneers did have that big play, how would they have responded to it?
Yeah, I mean, if there were still meaningful games in the season, I would agree. For me, if the Buccaneers had made that play and they had gotten the win, I wouldn't have felt any different about this game. Because like I said earlier, my biggest thing coming out of the game was one, the way that they played for Mike McDaniel, and two, the way that we saw the young guys play and step up to the plate, and make plays in some key situations, right? So if you still had all that and you had that one freak play, right? Like maybe we don't recover that onside kick and then Baker throws a Hail Mary to Mike Evans, right? If all that had happened, I wouldn't have come on the post game and said, "Oh, here we go. This team can't respond to adversity
Oh
again."
no,
I
I'm talking.
it still would have
Yeah,
been, a feel good type thing where there was still a lot of good stuff out of this game, and I don't think there's a whole lot that can happen this year that I would say that I feel confident in the group that is on the field today that you know, I don't think we could go on next year with the same group and say these guys are going to come out and make the plays at the end of games that we need. Right there,
right,
there has to be improvement in the roster. Whether while getting Minka back would be a huge one. Getting some guys in the draft, right? Some well placed free agents, right? You've still got to be able to find more of those playmakers because you have some of them, right? You got Devon Achane that can do some special stuff. You have Jordan Brooks defensively. You've got Minka Fitzpatrick, right? There are a few of them. There's just not enough of them, right? And because you can't depend on those guys to make that play every time, right? You can't say that we're going to get into 7, 8 close games throughout the season, and we've got 3 guys that are going to make plays for us every
right,
time. But if you can double that, right? If you can get to 6 guys that are capable of making a game-changing play, and each of those guys just does it once or twice a year, right? Then it's a totally different conversation for the entire season. So yeah, I don't I don't think that if that opportunity presented itself that this roster is built to do it, but I don't think that's the worst thing right now either.
for sure. Well, the Dolphins win their 7th game of the season. They are on to their final game on the road in New England, Week 18. We will have you guys with a preview of that during the week, as well as post game next week following that Week 18 clash with the Patriots in New England, who will be playing for something, playing for that number 1 seed in the AFC. So that'll be a lot of fun to see how this team performs on the road. In Foxborough against a very good Patriots team. But we thank you guys for listening and watching this post-game show as the Dolphins beat the Bucs 20-17 to improve to 7-9. We will see you guys throughout the week. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.